now what are the three paydays? Payday one is we exit most of our deals, at least at the beginning, on rent-own. So payday one is a non-refundable down payment that we collect from our buyer. They're a buyer. They're not a tenant, wannabe buyer. They're a buyer. They just can't, especially with COVID, get there yet. Yeah. Payday two is the spread between the underlying debt or the seller payment and what I'm collecting from my buyer monthly until they get their financing. That's payday two. So that accumulates over the term. And payday three is really neat because payday three is at the end of this rent-own term, our buyer who needed more time, perhaps because of COVID, now gets a loan and they cash us out. When they cash us out, all the principal pay down throughout that deal and underlying debt accrues to us. And of course, any markup. So that is a big, payday three is a big one. That tends to be half of the three paydays typically. So my payday is 80 grand and probably 40s in the back end.
Welcome to Racking Up Rentals, a show about how regular people, those of us without huge war chests of capital or insider connections, can build lasting wealth acquiring a portfolio of buy and hold real estate. But we don't just go mainstream looking at what's on the market and asking banks for loans, nor are we posting "we buy houses" signs or just looking for, quote, motivated sellers to make lowball offers to. You see, we are people-oriented deal makers. We sit down directly with sellers to work out win-win deals without agents or any other obstacles and buy properties nobody else even knows are for sale. I'm Jeff from The Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur. If you're the kind of real estate investor who wants long-term wealth, not get-rich-quick gimmicks or pictures of yourself holding fat checks on social media, this show is for you. Join me and quietly become the wealthiest person on your block. Now let's go rack up a rental portfolio.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Racking Up Rentals. Show notes for today's episode are going to be found at www.thoughtfulre.com/E69. Please do us a big favor. It's like really personally doing me a big favor, and I would appreciate it so much if you would hit the subscribe button in the podcast app. It really does help the platforms spread the message about this podcast to other thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs. Onward with today's episode. And in today's episode, I've got a real treat for you. I've got a special interview with Chris Prefontaine of Smart Real Estate Coach. Now, if you are a fan of doing creative deals, if you are a fan of the idea of deal structure and thinking outside the box, to use a cliche, then you are going to get a lot out of this episode. Chris is an expert on what can broadly be called buying and selling on terms. Now, we talk a lot about seller financing in this podcast, obviously, and this is going to be a slightly different flavor of those topics. Chris has written books. He's got his own podcast as well. We'll talk about all of that in the episode and the interview. In fact, be sure to stick around towards the end because towards the end, he makes a very generous offer to get one of his books for free, and you definitely are going to want to take advantage of that. But in this episode, we talk about what it means to buy and sell on terms, how you get paid 3 times when you do that, what it means to be a transaction engineer, and ultimately how you can control real estate and make money without necessarily being the owner exactly and the landlord. So here's my advice to you. If you are driving right now or walking the dog or taking a run, thank you for listening, first of all, but plan to maybe listen to this episode a second time. If you are in a place where you can grab a pen and a notepad, I think that'd be really wise because we're going to talk about some advanced strategies, some new concepts, and things that you're going to probably want to go back over a couple times in your mind and re-listen to. So get ready to learn some exciting new things, get exposed to some new ideas about ways that we can do creative, entrepreneurial real estate investing with Chris Prefontaine. Let's dive right into the interview. Okay, Chris, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to Racking Up Rentals.
Yeah, I'm psyched to be here, Jeff.
Yeah. So, all right, let's start with some of the basics. Who are you, and what is the real estate investing world's a big one. What's your corner of the real estate investing world?
Yeah, it sure is. The first question is we are a family-owned entity. It's myself, my son-in-law, Zach, and my son, Nick. So we operate in Rhode Island, as you and I were chatting off air. We do buy and sell every single day in the trenches still. It's a big part of keeping our finger on the pulse. In addition to doing that in our area, when I say that, we buy everything on terms. I know your audience loves this type of stuff. We buy everything lease purchase, owner financing, or subject to. And then we go out, Jeff, and teach that exact same thing. So it's like no different, protocol for us. We do that with students around North America, mostly United States. And when I say it's the exact same, we teach the exact same methods. The only difference is we're doing it with them in the trenches. I think there's a huge gap in the industry that, they can sell you stuff, great, but how do we get it done? How do we do deals? So we do deals with people all around the country.
Awesome. Wow. That sounds great. And can you tell us a little bit about how did you get started with terms? Were you born with a predilection for terms and face-to-face negotiation? Or did you learn that?
No, I mean, I've been at that real estate in general from 91 all the way till 2008 crash. After the crash is what spawned everything we do now. Because after the crash, we learned things the hard way, like don't sign personally guaranteeing bank loans, don't use banks, period. Don't over-leverage properties, don't bring investors on unless you absolutely have to do a cash out or you can have a big back end. So all that was because of everything that went on in 08. And then we said, all right, if we were to build this box again, if we were to go back in the market, what would it look like? And what it would look like is everything I just said, don't do that again. And so that's how we built all this. And we built it to weather the storms, not knowing COVID, clearly. But we built it, and then it was tested during that and absolutely cranked and thrived. So I'm super happy about it.
Yeah. One of the things that I have I've thought about a little bit that I think would be great to discuss is I imagine that you, just like I am, thanking ourselves now that something unexpected like COVID has hit, right? Which is its own totally unique thing and different, of course, than the 2008 crash and different, I'm sure, than whatever might happen in the future. But there are definitely some reasons why I'm thanking myself for doing things in this sort of off-market way, directly with real people, non-banks to a large extent. What are some of the things that you are just really thanking yourself, your 5 years ago version of Chris, that today you're really reaping the benefit of that? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So in other words, what do we do that's reaping now?
Yeah. Like why are you glad at this exact moment that you do business the way you do, especially?
Well, first and foremost, I'm glad that the model that we built to weather storms weathered the storm. It thrived, it didn't weather. Yeah. But more importantly, on the people side, to your earlier point, a couple things come to mind. One is the banks are turning on and turning off a switch like they're not even people involved. If you think about it. Yeah. So rates are down, but I pushed the bar so high that I just pushed out jumbo buyers and every other buyer that was borderline credit or reserve or down payment. They did. And then if things change back again and they flip the switch, it just doesn't seem fair to the buyers and sellers that can just flip switches like that. Yeah. So I love the fact that most of the national market, the amount of transactions being done outside of banks is growing dramatically. I don't know what the prediction will be, but I know in the 90s, it was 2 or 3% of total transactions were done, creatively outside of banks, owner financing and things of that nature, like we do. I don't know what the percentage is now. I think it's creeping into the teens, and I can't wait to see it go higher and higher.
Wow.
Because that's great for you. It's great for me. It's great for the audience. It's going to be really cool. Wow.
That's great. I've actually often wondered what that number is. I mean, my intuition says it's probably becoming more. But that's really great to hear. I have this, I don't know about you too, but I have this fundamental belief that the greatest likelihood of both parties, a buyer and a seller, coming up with something that is truly as good as it can be for both is going to be infinitely easier when those two people are just talking to each other instead of with all these other parties and intermediaries and lenders and stuff involved. Do you share that perspective?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So I try to always think of stories as you ask, and this one's easy. So there was a gentleman that sold us our office building. So the office that houses us and some tenants, we did on terms, just like we teach, right? We live for. So he said to me, we didn't have attorneys involved until the very end to close it. We didn't have realtors involved. He said to his realtor, look, I'll give you a referral fee. We got this. Because he was a large landowner and he wanted to owner finance. People say, how do you find it? You just look for people and you help them solve their challenges or their goals. It wasn't a bad challenge. So he said to me, wow, was this easy or what? We talked over the table, literally 2 meetings at his desk, then got the information over the attorneys and said, just do it. It's so much easier, to your point, than not hiding, but being stuck behind attorneys and banks.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, I want to jump into a little bit of the meat and the nuts and bolts of of what you do. So, on this show, we talk a lot about acquisition. We're very acquisition focused. And I know, from doing my homework and reading some of your content, listening to some of your episodes and stuff, that you were both buying and selling with terms. So can you give us a sense for what is kind of the big picture of the idea of buying and selling with terms, and what does it mean to be a transaction engineer?
Yeah. Okay, so buying and selling on terms goes back to just those three that we do. So as you know, in late 1800s, people were buying and selling on terms. This is not new. All we did is wrap a bow around it and develop a system, and more importantly, put some support behind it so people know how to get it done with you, right? So that's the terms would be owner financing, lease purchase, and sub two. But there's always deals after deals after deals. It'd be like another whole show just to talk about all the nuances with that. Second part of your question, Jeff, remind me then, was once we're doing the terms.
Yeah, being a transaction engineer. So when you use that expression, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so that's being in the seat, so to speak, as a transaction engineer to be able to pivot on any deal or in the middle of a deal. So you go into office building, good example. I go into the deal thinking free and clear. I'm going to make monthly principal payments. That's how I like to structure it. He came to the deal saying, well, I want down payment, I want interest. Complete opposite of what I do. Mm-hmm. So what do? As a transaction engineer, we said, how can we make that work? And I know you're big on this. We said, okay, how about I do principal only all the way for the first year, and then I amortize the balance, and then you get your interest. We both won. Yeah, that's a hybrid of two different ways to do things. And so that transaction engineer just means you have the wherewithal to do that. Now, how do you get that overnight? No. I said to one of our coaches today, we have certified coaches that we've taught that they could get coached by me, and they'll go through all these nuances in this deal. Not great, just all kinds of. I said, perfect. And they said, what do you mean perfect? I said, your next deal that comes at you like that, you're going to know all these things for your students now. You become that transaction engineer by having some seasoning.
Yeah. So I find that this idea of being a transaction engineer is not terribly common in the mainstream real estate investing world, even though there are people who have, like Ron LeGrand, who had and still have a really big following and really advocate for this idea. But why do you think this idea of being a transaction engineer is still not the mainstream? Why is it still all about buy low, sell high, find distressed people and all that kind of stuff?
That's a really good question, because I went for essentially 18 of my first years in real estate not knowing this, like new pieces of it, but not really knowing it. Why? I don't know the deep down answer. I wish I had a magic bullet for you on that one. But the fact that banks, one reason might be, you and I could surmise that banks have a lot of money and a lot at stake. Yeah. And so they're just plowing through the media, right? Whereas we're not going to get mainstream, but we are going to slowly grow grassroots organically. There's no question it's happening.
Yeah. I wonder sometimes if it's just some of these concepts they take a little bit more energy to digest and to really understand and then figure out how to apply. And I wonder if that deters some people. But I just feel like, gosh, if you're going to educate yourself enough to get into real estate investing, you already have a learning curve. Why not put, another 20% of that effort into it to learn some of the, and they're not tricks or tips, but just strategies about structure that can be so much more powerful, or can actually, this is a nice segue to another question I want to ask you. You talk about getting paid 3 times on a deal, right? So back to my kind of questions, like I wish, why don't more people take the time to realize how they could get paid 3 ways on a deal? So what do you mean when you say that?
Yeah, so I was going to go there before you even said to tie it together. So thank you. When you talked about why don't they take the time, I think, and this is probably going to surprise a lot of people, it's not real estate related. It's a mental piece. I really do. And here's why. And I'll go back to the 3 paydays to tie it in. If we teach the same exact skill sets, which we do, it's a base foundation course. If we teach the same thing, why do some people come out of the gate in 41 days most recently and do their first deal, but others most recently, it took 365 or so. Mm-hmm. Same course, same everything. The mental piece is a major, major part of the game. So we bring that component into our training, because I always say to my personal coaches and students, you are the only thing stopping you. So I think that's some of it, to your point.
Yeah.
Because if they knew beyond a shadow of a doubt, if they sat down with you and I and they said, I get it. I know it's certainty and predictability that I can get to the 3 paydays, which I'll explain, then they would do it, right? Everybody would do it. Because here's why. They're worth a lot, Jeff. Our 3 paydays, and I'll explain what they are, as a family company, are about 75 grand per deal, all 3 paydays. But I have students that dwarf that. Like I have students hitting 180. I just 10 minutes ago got a call from one of my more productive students. And I said, what's the all 3 paydays, Bill? He said, close to 200 grand on a deal, one deal.
Yeah.
So once they get their head wrapped around that, what are the 3 paydays? Payday 1 is we exit most of our deals, at least at the beginning, on rent-own. So Payday 1 is a non-refundable down payment that we collect from our buyer. They're a buyer. They're not a tenant, wannabe buyer. They're a buyer. They just can't, especially with COVID, get there yet. Yeah. Payday 2 is the spread between the underlying debt or the seller payment and what I'm collecting from my buyer monthly until they get their financing. That's Payday 2. So that accumulates over the term. And Payday 3 is really neat because Payday 3 is at the end of this rent-own term, our buyer who needed more time, perhaps because of COVID, now gets a loan and they cash us out. When they cash us out, all the principal pay down throughout that deal and underlying debt accrues to us. And of course, any markup. So that is a big, Payday 3 is a big one. That tends to be half of the 3 paydays typically. So my payday's 80 grand and probably 40s in the back end.
I see. Okay. So I want to step back and just break it down. I want to make sure everybody can follow. So what we just talked about, there were 3 paydays on the sort of disposition, so to speak, of a property. So what did it look like if we take that exact same deal that you then sold to a tenant buyer, right, with a lease option, if I track that correctly? What did the initial either acquisition or taking control of that property look like on the front end before you found that tenant buyer?
Sure. So if it's a sub 2 or an owner financing, a deed transfer. So let's go instead with first option, simple for a new person too, and that is the lease purchase tie-up. So in all states but Texas currently, with some nuances, you can be in the middle of you tying up the deal with your seller in a lease purchase, and then you rent to owning. That's what I call a sandwich. Cannot do those with some nuances in Texas. So given every other state, and frankly, the other 2 methods are more profitable, so Texas is great too. But how it's tied up is a simple lease purchase agreement, and the lease purchase agreement gives us the option to cash that out, buy it from the seller, or assign that to another buyer, our tenant buyer. It's very, after 8 years of doing terms deals, I can tell you that it's been tweaked and massaged in every which way. So it's a very cool win-win. You're never, as an investor, if you're using our forms, you're never pinned down to any term. There's wiggle room and there's flexibility in the dates always, if you're treating it properly. So the short answer is lease purchase agreement ties it up.
Okay. All right. So you tie it up with a lease purchase agreement, and you are exiting it essentially with a lease purchase agreement as well. And you are so your initial option consideration on your acquisition side is recapitalized to you by the option consideration paid by the tenant buyer. Is that right?
Good question. We have built in $10 to all our agreements, $10. So we don't put down payments down. We had the room, Jeff, this is a good one. So we had the whole room stand up right before COVID. We had our last live event, and we said, okay, we represented about 80 million in deals the students all did in that room. And there wasn't more than 2,500 spent on all of those deals for down payments.
Mm-hmm. That's funny.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, I see. Okay. So you're shelling out, lunch money to get into the deal, but your tenant buyer is actually making a more significant option fee payment to you on the disposition. Super
important, because without that, you have, and some people teach this, it's public. So I'm not talking out of school, they'll teach, just doesn't matter, collect a deposit. If they don't cash out, it's okay. Do it again. Some really well-known mentors do that. Okay. Legally, that might be okay, but morally and ethically, it stinks. So we collect that down payment from a buyer only after they've been through mortgage screening. So there's some true underwriting going down. And then they say, okay, you need more time, or you need to fix your credit, or you need this, or this. Fine. We'll give you enough time. It fits within our parameters. We have a mortgage ready date. Now we'll accept you. You are a true buyer. You just need more time.
Mm-hmm. I see. Okay. So now are all of your purchases and your students, are they doing the sandwich lease option? I think of like a coach on a sideline with a big binder of laminated pages, and they're running plays. So
Yeah.
I would think of the sandwich lease option either as a play or it's two plays put together, back to back, kind of the acquisition through lease option and the sale through lease option. Are you running that play for the most part, or are you coming into each new seller, relationship with more of kind of an open mind and saying, well, maybe this one's going to work out better as a note and trust deed. We're actually going to take ownership. This one's better as a sandwich lease option. This one may be better as just, I don't know, assigning a lease option or something like that. Or are you saying, no, we really like to run these plays when we can run these plays?
Yeah, good way of putting it. It's the piece that you said we're open, because there's a myriad of examples, as you know, but let me just give you some short ones. So if you come to me and you have some underlying debt, you're current, and you got some equity to protect, probably a sandwich. You probably have no reason to give me to transfer the deed. You come to me, and these are real scenarios I'm giving you. You come to me, you're going through a divorce, you're a month or two behind and going, we got to do something here. You're probably going to be a sub 2 purchase, and we're probably going to pick up a lot of equity, but we're going to fix that situation you have that you're probably going to have a mess with. If it's free and clear, my radar immediately goes to owner financing, because we make monthly principal payments, which hammers down the principal, which puts you in a great spot to kind of be recession resistant. So it just depends on their situation math wise and their situation motivation wise.
Okay. So then on that note, something we talk a lot about on this show is actually interpersonal dynamics, negotiation strategy that is about rapport building and listening well and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So what are some of the clues, maybe the insights that we should have our ears pricked listening for when we're sitting in that seller's living room? If we're thinking, I'd really love to run the sandwich lease option play here.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that we should keep our ears and eyes open for that would be indications that might be an appropriate play?
Yeah. So absolute most importantly, just understand fully from the human level, why are they selling? What's their motivation for selling? And then the date attached to that. Super important. So if I get a lead sheet from my virtual assistant, I don't go to the math yet. I don't go to his notes yet. I go right to reason for selling. Because if it's upsize, downsize with no dates, not really something I'm really anxious to chat with tomorrow. But if it's, I got to reload out of state, I have this date, I got divorce, I need debt relief. You just got to listen to the reason first and foremost. And then can you solve it? Can you help them? Because it's not always negative. Sometimes very positive. They just want the most money over time. Mm-hmm. The next thing for us on these deals would be, if there is equity, so it's not a stress situation, it's just a, hey, I want the most out. Can they wait for it? Or do they have to go buy a home with that equity for their family? That's the only thing. My opening script in the living room or on the phone is, hey, Jeff, one quick question. If I got you to your full price, I don't know yet, but if I got you there, could you wait for that equity you have that you're trying to protect, that you didn't get perhaps as an expired listing or whatever? That's a key question after understanding the motivation and the dates.
Okay.
Those three things.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes really good sense. Okay. And I've heard, or I've seen written in some of your content, this expression of the perfect triangle. Mm-hmm. Would you mind explaining to us what the perfect triangle is?
It kind of came about at the very beginning of COVID. I started talking about it and put it on my Thriving in Chaos series and on the podcast, because I forget who I learned it from. It was a series of different people, but one side of the triangle, if I was drawing it for you, would be to attach yourself to some kind of a movement. Doesn't matter what yet, didn't even go financial yet with that, just attach yourself to movement. Second piece of the triangle, as a result of being in that movement or with that group, affect lives, including your own. So better lives. So back to the human aspect that you and I talked about, helping a lot of buyers and sellers that thought they were they thought they couldn't go any further because of what's going on. So power movement, affecting lives positively, including your own. And as a result of those two things, the third piece is being financially rewarded, because your financial reward in that whole human aspect is directly related to how many people you can help. And so we've got that going on now in the terms niche. So that's what I started talking about back April 1. I remember it because we had a pivot to a virtual event, and then this whole thought process came about. That's what I mean by the perfect triangle. It really, Jeff, I who knows how long, right? But I am telling people now, you have 9 months, in my opinion, maybe 12, but you have 9 months to create a decade of income in 3 paydays, the way this works. If you get after it, and not everybody will, but if you get after it, you've got a chance to really parlay about 10 years or so of 3 paydays. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely see how that would be the case. Okay. All right, great. Well, I know that you've written a few books, but you have a one that's pretty fresh, right? Kind of fresh off the presses. Can you tell us about that one?
Yeah. So we did Real Estate on Your Terms, kind of what you and I are just touching upon here. Back in 17, became a bestseller. And then before COVID, like a good year before COVID, we said this needs a refresh, like the terminology, because real estate changes rapidly. So we started refreshing it. And then we're at the final stages during the COVID pandemic hitting. And so we finished it. We added a chapter for Thriving in Chaos, and we've added 50% more content to the book. And so it's Real Estate on Your Terms, revised edition. My son and son-in-law have chapters in there. A couple of our students do. It's pretty deep. It's current. You can't get more current than that. It was released last month.
Okay, great.
We can give him a free copy if you want, and you can put it in the show notes, or I can give you a link. But we can give him a free copy electronically.
Oh, that would be amazing. Okay, great. And should we mention the link verbally here, or just put it in the show notes, or what?
Yeah, we can do both. So just go to free, SREC. That stands for Smart Real Estate Coach. So free, SRECbook.com. And that'll give you a chance to get those electronically. If you're big on, hey, I got to have the hard copy, Amazon has it now. It is shipping now.
Oh, that is fantastic. Thank you for sharing that.
You're very welcome.
Yeah. Okay. Everybody listening, you'd be crazy not to go grab a copy of that. And you have a podcast as well, right?
Yeah, Smart Real Estate Coach podcast.com, where we kind of expose not just the terms niche. I'm big on, I love chatting with people like yourself, just in the creative space and other niches, so new people can come in. I'm not so naive to think, hey, you got to do what we do. No, expose to everything. It's free. And then you decide which niche you're going to go into.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So to wrap up, I want to ask one big picture question, because I think, you're talking to an audience of people who they're predisposed to like the idea of, because I hammer on them every week about, going off market and thinking more creatively and doing a lot of things kind of under what I would consider a very broad umbrella of creative financing. I think that includes a lot of things, and this is one of those. But even though our audience here is predisposed to liking this might be a more advanced kind of an episode for a lot of people. So if you just zoom way out, and you just think about the big picture, help us understand why an investor would really like this type of approach over, actually owning rental properties and managing them as rental properties and things like that. And I think, I don't know if I've heard this in your content, but isn't one of the expressions Ron LeGrand is famous for is like control without ownership?
Yeah, he does that on what I call like an assignment. So I don't like that, because you only get one payday, but it's a cool little option for new people, kind of like wholesaling. They get one payday. Okay, so a couple things here. This is a really good question too. So the first answer is, there's two answers to it, but then I want to kind of qualify the staying in the deal thing, because like my office building, there are many deals that we have that we're going to be in for 20 years. Yeah. So you don't have to spin out of them. So I'll talk about that. But two answers. One is ease of entry. If the sandwich lease allows you to put $10 down, and we're doing 25 or 30 of those a month around the country with students, you can do it in your market, period. If you're in Texas, you'll revert to the other two options. It's okay. They're more lucrative anyway sometimes. But it's ease of entry for a new person. That's why I like the lease option, $10. Secondly, the flexibility and the adaptability in a market that's ever changing. I don't think after COVID, all of a sudden they're going to flip a switch and things are great again. It changed. That just changed a lot of things. And so it thrived during that. Why? It was built that way in 2008 to thrive all the storms. So you have flexibility in an up, a down, and a flat market. That's pretty cool. Now, some niches you could say that, but not all. So ease of entry, flexibility, and adaptability in all markets. And then third, I've done not all, but almost all, but big apartment buildings. And I can tell you most of my paydays were I was either acting as a landlord or I was getting one payday, one or the other. And they were good paydays, but they were one payday. So January rolls around like, oh man, I got to go do this again. I got to go create all that again. With 3 paydays, you create today income, which everybody wants. You create monthly income to pay your bills everybody wants, and you create long-term wealth. Well, that's a combination in any business model of the best 3 things you could possibly do. And then to just wrap this up to your point of holding. So on our sub 2 properties, we do hold some. Not only do we hold some, and because we can keep it as a rental if we want, like my building's a 20-year deal. We can also take a rent-to-own buyer. I know this gets advanced, but we take a rent-to-own buyer on a property that we own long-term. And if they prove themselves and we give them parameters and hoops to jump through, we then convert them and we own or finance that house for them. So we're in that deal for a lifetime, unless they cash us out.
Yeah. Okay. So for investors who are doing this, they are kind of building a portfolio without exactly all of the responsibility of building a portfolio, but they're creating those, to your point, those paydays that serve them now, in the future, and in the long-term future, but without necessarily, I guess all of the full responsibility or some of the potential downsides of actually being on title and managing it on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, because even if you're on title, think about that one I just told you. That was a real deal. Every time I said something, it was a real deal that I have in my head. So you're a tenant buyer. You come in. I own the house subject to, so I have no clock ticking. And I say to you, hey, Jeff, you make your payments on time for a year and you make all your deposits that you promised. Instead of you going to the bank, which you thought coming in my door, we'll owner finance you. We'll give you a 20-year or 30-year mortgage. Now, the difference between you being a tenant buyer and acting like a buyer and you then being a real buyer, owner financing with us, compared to a tenant, it's a different animal. They are entirely different behaviors because they act like, behave like, and pay for things like they went and got a mortgage already, obviously.
Yeah.
Entirely different. Yeah.
Different mentality for sure.
Yep. Yeah. You don't get the, my toilet's leaking, my light bulb. You just don't get it. The conversation at the beginning is, hey, Jeff, you're a buyer here, buddy. You just don't have a mortgage yet. So we're going to treat you like that. You're a buyer.
Yeah. And my understanding too, at least maybe this is old data, but I've heard that there are actually a pretty fair number of those people who enter into an agreement as a tenant buyer, but then ultimately don't really exercise their option. And so all along, you've had somebody who's been taking care of the property with an owner's mentality. They've made a down payment, but then they don't choose to close it out, I guess, and exercise the option. Is that your experience?
Yeah, I'm so glad, because I forgot. I try to bring this up every time and I forgot to bring it up. So thank you for that one. So here's the deal. A couple mentors, one of which you mentioned, that ratio is usually like 95.5% cashing out. I've been on numerous shows where that's the ratio.
Oh, wow.
Ours is inverse. We have about a 2 to 5% default rate. Why? Because when you come in the door, Jeff, as a buyer, you are going through underwriting. Like if it smells or shows on paper that you're not a true buyer, you're just a wannabe buyer, rent a rental. Hey, I have a hope to buy someday, no plan. You're not getting in the house because I know it's going to happen. You're going to default, and that again might be okay legally, but it just stinks because you're setting these people up to lose.
Yeah.
So we set them up to win. We got 95% success rate, and sometimes higher some years.
Yeah, that's obviously that's great overall. But I'll tell you, for our audience, we call ourselves thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs, and things like ethics and integrity, even if someone chooses not to exercise their option, that's still ethical and with integrity. But I can tell you, in the heart of most of the people listening to this and the people who are in this community that I'm part of, that will make them feel good, knowing that most of these buyers are able to proceed, and it's actually truly a mechanism not only for maximizing our own cash flow and mitigating our risk, but also truly getting more people into homes as well. So I know that's going to matter a lot to our audience too.
It's just awesome. Yeah. Like next week, the end of the year, we have two, what I call Payday 3s, and they were accelerated because of the low rates. And because for 2 or 3 years, they've worked hard on the program better than they would if they're out on their own, because people don't realize rates are great, but it's tough.
Yeah.
And so these are early cash outs, which is really cool. And such a win-win. It's such a healthy thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. I like that a lot. Okay. So we've got free srecbook.com. I would encourage everybody to grab a copy of that. Everybody should go listen to Chris's podcast as well, Smart Real Estate Coach podcast. And if somebody wants to be able to connect with you in some other way besides those two, what's the best way to do that?
One of two ways, Jeff, and the staff will love me for this, but I'll give you two things. One is they can just go to smartrealestatecoach.com. That's easy. There's a free webinar, like a lot of free stuff, because I want you to be able to dip your toe in. If you want a free call there's only 3 of us that do them, and I'm one of them, myself, my son-in-law, and our strategy expert, just go to smartrealestatecoach.com/action. They could be brand new or well-seasoned, and we'll do a call with you for about 15 minutes. Won't cost you 10 cents, and I promise you'll leave with a nugget.
Awesome. That's a great offer as well. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I think everybody's going to find this super interesting. I think for everybody listening, this might be one you want to listen to a couple times, and with the pause button and a notepad, because this is going to open up some new ideas. But I think it's really exciting, not just because you can get more deals done and optimize them in better ways, but to me, this just proves the very simple point that there's a million different ways to do things in real estate. I mean, it could be almost overwhelming to think about how many different avenues there are to accomplish anything. And this is probably a whole kind of category of things that a lot of listeners haven't thought of before. And so hopefully it's encouraging and inspiring to want to learn more about the plays in the playbook, you know?
I agree. And that just screams, don't get caught up with shiny objects then, because of what you said. Like, there's a lot to learn in each niche. Take one and run with it for 3 years.
Yeah. Love it. All right, Chris, thank you so much for joining us on Racking Up Rentals. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I hope I gave you some nuggets.
Well, there you have it. And I don't like to be that guy who says I told you so, but you're probably going to want to listen to this one again. Am I right? I've listened to it a couple times myself too, and I'm excited to continue going through Chris's materials himself. So I really hope you take him up on the offer for his book and check out his podcast and everything. I hope that this has really opened your mind to lots of new things that you want to look into and understand, because you can really do Chris's business model with the thoughtful real estate entrepreneur's approach. So that's it for today's episode of Racking Up Rentals. Again, show notes for this one are at thoughtfulre.com/E69. Please do us a massive favor by hitting that subscribe button in the podcast app. If you wouldn't mind taking about 12 seconds to just rate and review the show wherever you listen to it, that'd be so helpful. Did you know that we have a Facebook group for thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs? Well, if you didn't, we need you in there because we need your thoughts, and it's a nice, vibrant community. It's called Rental Portfolio Wealth Builders. You can either search for that on Facebook or just type in group.thoughtfulre.com into your browser, and you will be taken right there. If you like this episode, and I really hope you did, please take a screenshot of it. Post that screenshot to Instagram and tag us. We are at Thoughtful Real Estate. I will catch you in the next episode. Until then, this is Jeff from the Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur signing off.
Thanks for listening to Racking Up Rentals, where we build long-term wealth by being win-win deal makers. Remember, solve the person to unlock the deal and solve the financing to unlock the profits.